October 1907. An 18-year-old boy stands in a dim hallway in Vienna and opens a letter from the Academy of Fine Arts. In our timeline, that institution rejected him. That failure, combined with poverty and the toxic political ferment of Vienna, fueled a resentment that eventually burned down a continent. But suppose the examiner tilted the young man's portfolio slightly differently. Suppose he saw potential in the architectural sketches, forgave the wooden human figures, and wrote the word accepted. If we remove this specific man's political rise, do the underlying forces of the 20th century, nationalism, economic collapse, and prejudice, simply find another channel? Massive systemic currents push against localized choices. The system still demands a catastrophe. Inside the academy, rigorous critique forces the student out of his ideological shell. His professors demand he stop drawing empty, mathematically perfect buildings and start observing the messy, complicated people who actually live inside them. He sits beside Marcus Weiss, a Jewish student from Budapest. For 2 years, they argue over spatial reasoning and share coffee at the Naschmarkt. When he hears a casual slur in the academy halls, he finds that the abstract category he once resented now has a specific face, one that has spent hundreds of hours helping him see the world more clearly. Conscripted into the First World War, he is reassigned to a military unit as a war artist. Instead of building political myths, his job requires him to sit in freezing trenches, documenting the exhausted reality of mechanized slaughter. Returning to a defeated Germany, he watches the economy collapse. Men fight in the streets. But rather than standing on a beer hall table organizing that rage, he channels it onto canvas, painting the hollowed faces of the urban unemployed. The discipline of making art functions as a psychological intervention. The untreated resentment of his youth is slowly ground down into observational empathy. He is simply a painter. Yet the absence of one man does not erase the systemic pressure. Germany is still utterly crushed by the Versailles Treaty, and hyperinflation forces children to play with blocks of worthless currency. The rage is searching for an outlet. The continent remains saturated with deep, ambient prejudice. Anti-Semitism remains a respectable political tool, embedded in university quotas and street violence, operating fully independent of any single leader's rhetoric. A conservative, nationalist German government eventually takes power. Driven by traditional military doctrine and a desire to reclaim territory, they invade Poland in 1939. The Second World War begins right on schedule. The conflict plays out through the same structural military logic. Armored divisions punch through the Ardennes to collapse France. Allied troops are heavily pushed back to the beaches of Dunkirk, wading into the surf to evacuate across the Channel. The structural kindling for a global conflagration had been gathering for decades. Removing the primary arsonist changes the temperature of the fire, but the ignition was already inevitable. When Allied forces march into occupied territories, they uncover brutal political prisons and evidence of severe war crimes, but they do not find the massive mechanized bureaucracy of death camps. They find snow, trees, and silence. Violent pogroms and spontaneous wartime atrocities still scarred the Eastern Front, perpetrated by local populations and indifferent occupying forces. But a centralized project of complete extermination operates on different mechanics. The logistical machinery of the Holocaust, the synchronized rail schedules, and the specialized facilities required the absolute authority and the fanatical, unyielding obsession of one specific man. Disindustrialized genocide required a specific architect to translate ambient prejudice into the systematic murder of millions. Without that singular will to coordinate every branch of the state, the 20th century's most horrific chapter remains unwritten. The leaders of this alternate war still face a military tribunal at Nuremberg. International law still adapts to prosecute crimes against humanity, though the evidence lacks the paralyzing scale of industrial genocide. In 1965, a 76-year-old man walks through a museum in Vienna, looking at a career retrospective of his own paintings. He is an ordinary, moderately successful artist who spent decades grappling with his own personal failures on a piece of canvas. rather than projecting them onto millions of people. Because a single door opened in 1907, history's darkest chapter was rewritten, and 6 million lived.